Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Samach Gimel. We're going to get started from the story that we ended with last time about Rabbi Yanai. If you remember, Rabbi Yanai was trying to help poor people. And what did he do? He took their produce in the Shemitah year and returned them new produce. He took a loan, basically, to loan me your produce in the Shemitah year to basically save them from having to get rid of all their extra produce. And I'll return you produce next year. And then it won't have the sanctity of the Shemitah year. To which the rabbis were a little bit, they came and they said to Rabbi Yochanan, is this okay? And Rabbi Yochanan said, yes, it's fine. And it works just like the et. And we ended with a case where we actually talked about two parts to it. Really, one part is the real comparison. But the Bright had said, and we'll read it based on the Hachika Amar at the end there, at the end of yesterday's daf, Natanla b'char kach ba'aleha, if he gives her an etnan and then has relations with the prostitute, or ba'aleha b'char kach natanla, that's the real case, it's the comparison. If he has relations with her and later pays for the money, which is just like this, takes out the loan and later pays them back the money, we're not going to have a connection between that and that, right? We're not going to view it as chalipin, right? As a transaction that one basically fills in for the other. In the Shemitah case, it doesn't have the sanctity of the Shemitah, and in the an case, it doesn't have the status of an an. And before we get back to this case, we're going to go back to the first case, which is Natan la v'char kach ba'aleha. The Gemara is going to ask a question. L'chi ba'aleha, lechol alei isur enan lemafreya. When he does have relations with her, why should it matter if basically, if first he gives her the gift, then he has relations. At the moment he has relations, the gift becomes an etnan. So if she's going to sacrifice it after, that should totally be a case of etnan. And it should be forbidden. It's basically a gift that was given for prostitution. What's the difference if the prostitution happened later? The gift was given for that purpose. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Kisha Kidma v'Kavta. We're going to have to talk about timelines today. So we have a timeline. First, he gave her the gift for prostitution. Then, before they engaged in prostitution, she sacrificed it. Then, later, they engaged in relations, and that must be the case. But the Gemara says, hey, Chidami, what exactly is this case? If he said, acquire this gift right now. I'm giving you this gift for prostitution, but it's yours from right now, even though we haven't yet engaged in prostitution yet. Pshita deshari, of course it's permitted. Because at the moment, the gift is hers from the moment he gives it to her. They haven't engaged in relations yet. So, of course, it's not an etnan. And really, it's just a gift because he gave it to her right then, even though they hadn't yet done anything. Now, we're going to have a different problem. If he didn't say it's yours from right now, then how on earth could she even sacrifice it? There's no way she could even sacrifice that. It's not even considered a sacrifice. Because ish kiyakdisha beito kodesh, this is in the end of Sefer Vayikra, talks all about consecration of items. It says, if you consecrate your item, it will be sanctified. That's what the Torah says. Ma beito birishuto, avkol birishuto. Just like your house, it's talking about a person sanctifying his house. Now, just like a person's house is in their domain, anything that's in your domain you can sanctify, but you can't sanctify something that's not in your domain. So if he didn't give it to her and said the gift, if he gave it to her but didn't say the gift is yours from now, and gave it to her and said basically, when we engage in relations, this will be yours, and she jumps ahead the gun and sacrifices it before, well, that wasn't hers to sacrifice. It's not even considered sanctified, so it's not even a sacrifice, even though maybe she went through the motions. So it's not an etnan, and for sure it's not permitted. So that's a separate problem. So now we don't really understand what the case is. So now they're going to have to find some middle ground. We're going to do the same thing with the sugya later, where kind of this extreme doesn't work, that extreme doesn't work. We're going to have to find some in between, where it was sort of hers, but wasn't fully hers. He gave it to her for prostitution and said, this will be, I'll let you have it in your possession until the time that we engage in relations. And if for some reason you need it and you're desperate and you have to use it, or for whatever reason you need it, then use it, then it can be yours from now. So basically, he didn't really give it to her yet. And that resolves the problem of, isn't it obvious that of course she can go sacrifice it if she wants. But he said, if you need it, it'll be yours from now. And then they're saying, well, if she decides to sacrifice it, it would be considered hers retroactively. She was able to consecrate it, and actually it's permitted because, again, it's not an etnan because they haven't even had relations yet. And with that, they figured out what exactly is this case of Natanla, and then Baalea. Now we're going to ask a takeoff on this, what we learn right now, and really on what Rabbi Elazar said, which is Kidmavi Krafto. So if we go to the timeline, she got the gift, she then sacrificed it, and only later engaged in relations. By Rav Shai asked, Kadmavi Kidashtoma. What if, okay, now go back to the timeline. She gets the gift, okay, in this in-between kind of way. It's yours, but it's not really yours yet until we engage in relations or until you really need it, and then you can use it. And then she decides, I'm going to consecrate it. And she says, this animal I'm going to use for a sacrifice. Then they engage in relations, and then she sacrifices it. Is that an etnan that's going to be forbidden, or is it permitted because the consecration happened when it wasn't yet an etnan? So it's kind of like, how significant is the moment of consecration? Kavan de Amar Mar. Well, now we're going to see. Since it said, and we've seen this a bunch of times, Amirato legavoa k'mesirato lehedyot. Talking about kinyanim, when people acquire things. So normally you acquire something with mashicha by pulling or by masira by passing it on. But when it comes to, and that's with a head, that's in regular interactions. Okay, money is in kona. We're going to come back to that later. Okay, in between Jews. But when it comes to gavoat, consecrating items, amirato, by just saying it, that's already like masirato lehedyot. Okay, so that's a kinyan. So since she consecrates it, when she hasn't yet had relations, maybe the status of it is not a status of an etna. Maybe it's permitted. That's the question. Or, okay, so now that's the first side of the question. So since we say that, kimanda grifte dami, it's as if she sacrificed it already before it was even an etna. Even though the sacrificing actually happens later, but the consecration, the moment of consecration is so important. Since that happened, it wasn't even an etna, it should be fine. O Dilma Hashtamia Hakai Itebene. Or maybe we say, look, but right now it's still in existence. In other words, what they really mean, what does it mean it's still in existence? It means now when the sacrifice was actually sacrificed, she had already engaged in prostitution with him. They had had relations. So the fact that maybe it's more important when the sacrifice takes place, this actually was an etna. So that's the question. Tifsha midi Rabbi Elazar. So they say, why don't we just learn it from Rabbi Elazar? Look at what he said. Tamar Rabbi Elazar, shekadmavi krafto. Right? It says she went ahead and sacrificed it. He didn't say she went ahead and consecrated it. So davgei krafto avalik deshto lo. It sounds like if she had just consecrated it before they engaged in relations, that wouldn't exempt this item from being an etna. So they answered, no. It's not so easy to answer the question. That's what Rav Shai asked it, because really what he wanted to know was, did Rabbi Elazar Gufe come by? He was really asking about what Rabbi Elazar himself said. Ma, what is it? Mifsha pshita le Rabbi Elazar dikravto davka. Is it that he really meant hikravto and not hikdishto, and therefore, right, avali kdishto lo, but consecrating it not? That's what we said a minute ago, that he specifically said hikravto and not hikdishto, because if she had consecrated, that wouldn't be enough to exclude this from being an etnan. Da'ite b'shapia, because it is an etnan, right? Because the sacrificing happened after the relations. Odilma, or perhaps when he said hikravto pshitale. That halacha was obvious to him, which is why he stated it. V'hikdashto misapkale, but maybe he wasn't sure what the halacha would be in a hikdashto case. And maybe that was, kind of left open. And talk about leaving things open. The Gemara answers with teku. We leave this open. We don't have an answer. We don't have an answer whether it was obvious to Rabbi Elazar that it wasn't, or obvious that it's not the same thing, or obvious, or he deliberated and didn't really know, and then we're left with an open question. Now we're going to go back to the original case that we used for our comparison to Rabbi Yanai, and we're going to bring a contradiction to this from a different Braita to that line in the Braita. If he has relations with her, then later pays her the gift, then the enan is mutal. It's permitted because time elapsed, and we don't view one as kind of what the commentaries use the language of chalipin of the other. It's not a complete exchange because it was given much later. So we don't view this etnan as a gift for prostitution, even though it kind of was. And that's why, in fact, we're going to see a different Braita actually says it is forbidden. It is an etnan. Uremini, this contradicts the following source. If he has relations with her, then gives her the gift, even if the gift was given even up to 3 years later. It's unclear from here what they mean beyond 3 years, maybe not. Unclear, but maybe they're just thinking no one's going to give the gift after 3 years. So at least from here until 3 years, et nena asul. It's going to be forbidden. So that's a complete contradiction to what the Braita said. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says the name of Rav Chisda. Lo kasha. Don't worry about the difficulty between these two Braitot. They were each talking about different situations. Had Amar hitba'ali li b'taleh. Had Amar le hitba'ali b'taleh stam. One is he comes to her and says, "Have relations with me, and I will give you this lamb." And the other is, he said, that's when it's going to be forbidden because he designated specifically that lamb, even though he didn't give her the lamb for three more years, he designated it. And the other is, he said, Hidbali b'talestam. He just said, I want to have, relations with you and I'll give you a lamb without specifying what lamb. So then when he gives her some random lamb later, that's not an etnan because it wasn't directly linked to the time of the act, when the act happened, as opposed to the first case where he actually dedicated that lamb to this action and then it will be forbidden. But the Gemara is going to question this. Just because he said, I'm going to give you this lamb, she didn't pull the lamb. She didn't bring it into her domain at all. So it's not really directly linked, even though he said, I'll give it to her, but he didn't do anything to kind of give it to her. So it's not really hers. So it's not really an etnan because it's not really directly linked to this action. Even though he said he would, it's not that, it doesn't really have any meaning. To which the Gemara answers two possible answers. Number one, bizona goya, or maybe you have ovedet kochavim. If the zona is a non-Jew, now why is that relevant? I told you we mentioned about the money, mao konot or not konot. Dilo kanya b'mashicha. When Jews do acts of acquiring, they need to do mashicha. So she didn't do mashicha; it's not hers. But when non-Jews do acquiring, when you do a Jew does an action with a non-Jew, as soon as one of them, okay, as soon as the money is transferred, that's considered an act of acquiring. Therefore, in our case, now there's no money here, but what they're saying is when the act of sexual relations happens between the prostitute and the man, basically, if he committed to her, I'm going to give you this taleh, then as soon as, because you're going to have relations with me, as soon as they have relations, that's like giving the money. And that means that the taleh is already hers, because if there's no kinyan, then there's no, right? If we say mashicha's koneh, well, there was no mashicha. The act of relations isn't mashicha. And nobody, right? Because we're doing a barter here. We're trading one thing for another. So normal barter, if one person pulls one object, then the other object is automatically already acquired by the other one. So that would be an act what we call what here is chalipin. Then that would be an etnan, because now in this case, because it's a non-Jew, as soon as the act of relations happens, it's immediately that taleh that he designated is immediately acquired by her. Whereas it wouldn't be if it was taleh stam, because there is no taleh to acquire, right? It's just that he committed down the road, he will give her one. So that's answer number one. Answer number two. Now, we are talking about a Jewish prostitute. Now, again, there has to be some sort of mashicha for this to work. Well, it's in her courtyard. Now, things in your courtyard, if you remember, your chatzar is like your hand, and your chatzar can acquire things. So since he said with this taleh, and the taleh was in her courtyard, and he designated that one, it becomes hers. And again, why does it matter? As soon as it becomes hers, it's basically like she received that on account of the prostitution, and it's an etnan, and it'll be forbidden to use as a sacrifice, even though in the end he takes it home with him and it's not really hers in the end, right? Like he'll only give it to her later. But because it was in her courtyard, at that point she acquired it. So when she later gets it and brings it, it was really hers from the moment it was in her courtyard. To which the Gemara asked, but wait, if it's in her courtyard, but the language doesn't work. The language says, Ba'aleha, and then he gives it to her. Hakanyala, but he acquired it, and she acquired it. It's not after he gave it to her. She acquired it right now. So what do you mean after he gave it to her? To which they answer, Lo tzricha. Deshavia nila apotiki. Now, what the Gemara is troubled with is if it's really hers at that moment, then it's hers. Like there's nothing to discuss. Even if he takes it home and brings it back, it's hers. So of course, when she gets it later, it's hers. So it would have to be something intermediary, just like before. We had to find some middle position to, right, middle situation to explain it. Lo tzricha deshavia nihala apotiki. He said, this will be an apotiki for you. Now, before we thought, he said, this lamb is going to be your payment. Now we're going to say not exactly. This lamb is an apotiki. What's an apotiki? Well, generally, if I take out a loan and then I say, listen, I'm going to pay you back for this loan from this. And what it really means is, right, an apotiki, if I make it an apotiki, what it means is if I don't pay you for something else, then this will be what you can collect from it. It's a way of sort of guaranteeing you that I'm going to give you something. So if he made it an apotiki, meaning to Amrla, he said to her, if I give you money for the prostitution until the following date, great. Vilo, shatle bet nanech. And if not, then keep this lamb and it will be your etna. And that's why it's this in between, because it's not exactly hers, but it's likely, yeah, it could be hers. And he was in her courtyard. So we come up with this in between position where we can explain why this really is an etna, and it was in her possession, because it was in her possession already from the beginning, even though it wasn't 100% clear it was going to be hers. And that's why we end up with this case. So that was all to resolve this Braita, where it had the same halacha as our Braita, but the same, not the same halacha, the same case, but came to a totally different conclusion. In our Braita, it said it was permitted. The second Braita we saw said it was forbidden. So we had to say that that one was one where, again, he said this lamb as opposed to I'll pay you a lamb. Okay, and once he becomes very specific about a certain item, and then we had to say either she was Zona Goya or it was in her courtyard. There has to be some sort of kinyan, otherwise even talezeh wouldn't work, to make it an etna. Now we go back to the case of Rabbi Yanai and the poor people. And Mativ Rav Shesha. Rav Shesha brings a difficulty on Rabbi Yanai from the following Braita. Omer Adam lechamarav ulepoalav. I have workers who are working for me, and I go to the workers, and I have to pay their lunch. So what do I tell them? L'chu ve'ichlu b'dinar zeh. Take this money, and you guys can go buy yourselves food. Here's your food allowance. So shtu b'dinar zeh. Go out and eat, go out and drink with this money. Ve'eno choshesh, and I don't have to worry, turning out on a bet. Lo mishum shvi'i, lo mishum aser, v'lo mishum yenesach. Now Rashi tells us on the previous Amud, I just turned the page, but before that, if you don't just turn the page back, Rashi says, Ovdei kochabim or amei haaretz. I have workers who are either idol worshippers or they're amei haaretz. They don't keep mitzvot, certain mitzvot very well. I don't have to worry, not that they're going to go and buy Shemitah produce, which is forbidden to do business with Shemitah with Shemitah produce. I don't have to worry they're going to buy stuff that's not meisered and eat it without meisering it. Right? Those are really more issues for the amei haaretz. And I don't have to worry because of yenesach, that if they're idol worshippers, that they're going to go buy yenesach. It's not my problem because I give them money and they do with their food allowance whatever they want. However, go to the store, buy whatever you want, but you don't have money. I'll pay the money later. Okay, go out and eat, and I'll pay the guy later. Okay, I'll pay the storekeeper later for your food. Go out and eat, go out and drink, and I'll pay the money. In that case, now, since I'm paying directly for their food, it's a problem. Now, what do you see here? Alma ki kapara. When I pay that later, to make isur kapara, it's as if I bought the forbidden item, even though, right, there was a time distance. Hachanami, why don't we say the same thing with Rabbi Yanai? When he returned the money, ki kapara, to make isur kapara. Right? When he returned the money with the loan, he returned the produce. It was in place of the original produce. It should have the kedusha of the original produce. And we said it doesn't, right? Which would then mean it would have to be destroyed because it was past the time of bior. So how do you reconcile that? Well, we're going to have 4 possible answers here. The first 2 we'll reject, and then we'll have another 2. And the last 2 we're going to end up reinterpreting the case entirely and saying this has nothing to do with Rabbi Yanai, and we didn't understand it properly, and they'll have to change the words of the Braita. So Tirgama Rav Chisda, which really means this was a good question because there's really no good answer without changing the wording. Tirgama Rav Chisda b'chemvaniha mikifo dimishtabele. Rav Chisda says this thing with the store was a case where the store sells things on credit. Why is that relevant? Because when the store sells things on credit, mishtabele, the person who owes the money on credit, this case, it would be me, right, who let my workers go eat there and I owe the money. If the storekeeper always gets things on credit, then I'm immediately like my stuff is subjugated to this loan, to this what I owe. And therefore, it's since something happens immediately, which is I'm immediately responsible to pay this money, then it's as if the dinar was acquired right then, the money that was obligated. And therefore, that money is going to be basically having bought something forbidden, and that's my problem. I can't do that. No, so the Gemara says, okay, this seems to imply if it's not a chemani who generally takes on credit, then it would be permitted because there's no shibud. But the Gemara is going to question that. So if it's chemani that doesn't, usually a storekeeper who doesn't take on credit, it'll be permitted. Well, there's going to be two issues with this. Number one, if it's really permitted, if it's a storekeeper that doesn't generally take on credit, sell on credit, well then, well, remember, the Bright brought two cases. The first was the one they just quoted. If I say, go take my money and go buy yourself food, it's permitted. Well, if the Bright is listing when it's permitted, when it's forbidden, and this case of go take the money, go take the food, and I'll pay the money later, will be permitted if it's not a store that generally takes stuff on credit, then it should have also mentioned that case in the Mishnah and the Braita, and it should have said in the second part of the Braita, it's going to be forbidden if it's chamani that generally a storekeeper who sells stuff on credit. Because then there's this shibud. It's immediate, right? I'm obligated the dinar immediately. But it should have said will be permitted. Okay. But now we have a bigger question, which is, and besides that, the od in general, even if the storekeeper doesn't generally take things on credit, obviously, if somebody took something from his store and now I have to pay the money later, obviously my dinar is already mishuabad. In other words, it shouldn't make a difference whether it's mikifo or a mikifo. And in fact, we're going to prove it because Rava said, we're going to have a similar case, but not exactly. We're going to have three people. So the same kind of parallel three people, but not storekeeper and employer. But if someone says, now this is the parallel to me, who's the person who hired the workers, right, and has to pay their food. Also, let's say I say to someone, to my friend, who's like the storekeeper in this case, go give 100 shekels to, or 100 zuzim, to someone else, okay? And that's the parallel to the workers, right? It's someone's doing something for someone else based on my request, and I'm going to pay the money later, right? So if I say, Temanela Ploni, go give them money, it's actually a little different because I'm asking them to loan someone money. And what I'm saying is, Yikanu kol nechasaylach, and all my possessions will be subjugated to this loan, meaning I'm guaranteeing the loan. Okay, if they don't pay back, right? Kanamidin aref. All my possessions, not really all, but the value of the loan is subjugated to that person right now because I committed to that. So they're basically saying, even though right, this seems to prove that if I owe money to someone, just like with the storekeeper, I basically committed to pay, right? The workers came in and said, Michelle said she paid for us. So I'm subjugated immediately. My possessions are subjugated. And therefore, Ella Amar Rava, so Rava, we basically reject Rav Chisda. Rava's going to give a different explanation. Lo shna mekifo, lo shna she'em mekifo. This whole distinction the Rav Chisda set up, not a good distinction. Okay, but let's go back to Rabbi Yanai. Why was it okay? Even though he obviously subjugated his, right, he took out a loan. He said, I promise I'll pay you back. But he didn't say what he's going to pay back with. And therefore, when he pays the produce the next year, they weren't linked to anything, right? All of his possessions in general were, but not so directly because we knew it was going to come from something, but we didn't know from where. When he decides the next year, this is what I'm paying you back from, this particular produce, it's not chalipin, it's not in place of the other stuff. And that's why it's permitted. But this isn't going to work either. But also in the case of the poalim, it's the same thing. right? When they bought the shviyit, let's say, and then I later paid the money, it also wasn't clear. There was a shibud, I owed money, but it wasn't clear what money I was going to pay with. So why, when I pay the money, it also shouldn't be chalipin then. It shouldn't be that the shviyit should be nitfas on my money, and it shouldn't be a problem for me. So that doesn't work either. So now we're going to go to answer number three. Hacha amarav papa, kigon shikdim lo dinar. Okay, like I said before, you might remember, you might not remember, but we're going to now change the case. We're going to say the case isn't what we thought it was. That the workers went, took the food, I paid later. No, I actually paid up front. Okay, it's definitely not what it says, but okay, and we're going to ask that in a minute. But Rav Papa says I pay the money first. If I pay the money up front, I can't pay money up front, and then this is a totally different situation. Basically, I'm paying money, then they're taking items that are forbidden items. So I can't do that, right? I can't do schola business with payroll shvi'it. I can't buy maaser directly for them that's going to make them sing because then they're right stuff that wasn't maaser and they're going to eat it. And I can't buy yenesech and give it to them because then I'm benefiting from yenesech. So that's the case. Amar Rav Kahana, now comes Rav Kahana and says, look, Amarita lishmata kamei de Rav Tzvi min Harda. I was in front of Rav Tzvi in Harda, and I told him exactly what Rav Papa said. Amar li, he said to me, Ihachi, adatane tzu v'echlu tzu shtu ani porea, tzu v'echlu tzu v'shtu v'ani machashev v'baile. Shouldn't say, go out, eat, and I'll pay, which is what the Braita said. The Braita should say, go out and eat, right? I paid a dinar, I prepaid. I have a dinar. I paid. You can go eat whatever you want. And then I'll go back to the storekeeper. And if I owe some money or he owes me money, we'll figure it out. That's mechashev. Then we'll do the cheshbon. Okay, we'll figure out who owes who what. So Amrele, so Rav Kahana says, okay, fine. Have it your way. Today, it's uvani mechashev. Change the wording. That's what it should say. And then the case is different than we thought. It's not su v'shtu vani polea. Su v'shtu vani machashev because you already paid the dinar in the beginning. Rav Ashi gives a fourth answer. Rav Ashi amar kigon shenata v'natan biyad. Totally different case. And again, once we do this, then I paid from the beginning, and then this has nothing to do with Rabbi Yana who paid at the end, right? And so paid much later. So, and then we have no questions. So Rav Ashi said, I went to the store and I took the food myself and brought it to them. And then I'm going to be responsible because I did the problem with Perot Shvi, for example, right? Which I shouldn't have been doing business. Or the truth is that there's a bit of a question about what exactly the issue is. Just I want to clarify 1 second. Shvi'it is more the issue that I'm really paying back something I owe with Shemitah produce because I'm basically I owe mizonot, and I'm basically getting Shemitah produce to fulfill some obligation I have. That seems to be the problem with the Shvit. Okay, the maaser is that I'm helping people eat food, like they're going to end up eating it. It's not maaser, and then they're going to eat it without tithing it, or I'm buying them yenesef, and then they're going to eat it. I'm benefiting from yenesef. So it's more that I'm doing the action directly. That's going to be the problem. To which again we're going to say, okay, but Amarle Rav Yemer Rav Ashi, Rav Yemer said that doesn't match what it says. Ihachi aditani tzu v'echlu tzu v'shdu. It says go out and eat, and I'll pay back. No, it should be tlu v'echlu tlu shdu mebayle. It should be take the food. Here's the food. Here's the food. Right? You give them the food that you already paid for. Amarle, so he says, okay, today change it to tlu v'echlu tlu v'shdu. Okay, change the wording. That resolves it. So again. The only way to really make this make sense in light of what Rabbi Yanai's situation is to basically change what the real case in this Braita was and say this must have been a mistake, what they said, and you have to change the case. And then it has nothing to do with Rabbi Yanai at all. Okay, we'll end with this question, which is going to lead us into sugya we're going to discuss tomorrow more, which is Yativ Rav Nachman v'Ula ba'Avimi bar Papi. These three rabbis were sitting. The Yativ Rabbi Chia bar Abi Gabayu, Ami Gabayu, Rabbi Chia bar Ami was sitting with them. They asked the following question. What if somebody hires a Jew to break barrels of yenesech and basically destroy it? Let's start with the second option. It's just good to get rid of Avodah Zarah. Remember, Abed Abdun, you're supposed to destroy all their idol worship stuff. So basically, it should be a good job for a Jew to do, which is to destroy anything to get rid of tifla, which is things that are bad, things that are, like, there's a whole bunch of different definitions of tiflat. If you remember the whole Gemara about women, teaching her Torah is like teaching her tiflut, either emptiness or maybe it'll lead to bad behavior, right? And this means Avodah Zarah. Anything getting rid of bad things is good. Or, now going back to the first option, do we say, this is fascinating, I want it to exist. Why do I want it to exist? So I can break it. In order to break it, it has to exist. So because I want it to exist momentarily before I break it, because now I have a job and I have something to do, does that mean I'm benefiting from the Yenesech and that I can't do? So that's the question. You should break it and you will be blessed. Okay. It's a good thing to get rid of Avodah Zarah. And the next thing the Gemara is going to do, which we'll get into tomorrow, is Lema Masayale. Maybe this source provides a support for Rav Nachman's ruling, this Tannaitic source, and we'll get into that tomorrow. Okay, so with that, we finished for today. Let's just review. We started with Rabbi Yanai's story. From that, we compared it to, because when Rabbi Yochanan said it was okay what he did, he said, and also an etnan in a similar situation is permitted. Then we had the two cases of the etnan, and we went into, the first case, which wasn't really the comparable case, where first they had relation, first he gave her a gift, then they have relations. Why isn't that an etnan? And then we said, well, it must be that she actually sacrificed it in between. And then we said, how could she have done that? And then, what exactly is the case? We had to come up with this in between of how she partly owned it, didn't really own it. It's like he gave it to her, but didn't really, like said, if you need it, you can use it, but really it's not yours until we engage in relations. And then she sacrificed it before. And then Rav Hoshai asked, what if she consecrated it in between, but sacrificed it after? And then we had the whole deliberation there, which we were left with the deliberation. And then we said the case where we compared to Rabbi Yanai, where they pay the money later with the etnan, there's a different source that said actually it is an etnan and it's not permitted. And then we had to say one is where he designated a taleh and the other one was where he didn't designate the gift. Okay, and then we had a bit of a deliberation about that. If he designated the gift but didn't give it to her, well then it wasn't really hers, right? And then it wasn't really an etnan because it wasn't even given to her yet and wasn't hers. So there has to be some sort of kinyan. So we came up with two possible ways. Either she wasn't Jewish or she was Jewish, but he's put it in her courtyard. And then we had to also come up with some in-between intermediary case there where it was sort of in her courtyard. It wasn't really, right? It was in her courtyard, but it wasn't really hers, but it was sort of hers. Then we had to come up with that case where it was an apotiki. Then Rav Sheshet brought a contradiction from this other case about paying the workers for their food. And which way is it okay? Which way is it not okay? And from the not okay case, we said, wait, but that sounds very comparable to Rabbi Yanai, to which in the end, we had to explain that case totally differently, to say it had nothing to do with Rabbi Yanai's case. And after having two bad attempts of resolving the contradiction, we then ended up with two good attempts, but they had to reread the case in the Breita. And from there, we ended with this case about hiring someone to break barrels of Yenesach, and we learned that it was permitted. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.